All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to continue our discussion around ICHRA. Is Anthony's note taker yours, Mary Margaret?
No, you can kick that thing out. We're still trying
Okay,
to dial those in.
no
They
problem.
want to barge in on everything, whether they're needed or not.
I saw the robot trying to come in and take. I just won't let him in.
Yeah,
So,
no worries.
but I'm excited to continue this conversation. We've had a number of conversations over, honestly, the last couple of years, but in recent weeks and months, we've started to ramp up the training a little bit. And so I invited Mary Margaret to come in and speak with us. Mary Margaret runs an organization called Savii, and some of you have been introduced to Savii in the past. I think last year around this time, we did some trainings. Our plan is that this will be the first of several trainings that we're going to do with Savii, just to really help you guys get, more well versed on what these ICHRAs can do for us. A couple of things that I just wanted to share with you all before we turn things over to Mary Margaret. I've had several conversations here in just the last 48 hours around some things that are happening that I think are going to make ICHRA even more important of an opportunity for us. One of the big things, and you guys may have seen it, CMS is really tightening down. An email came out maybe an hour and a half ago from CMS, but CMS is really tightening down the documentation that's going to be needed to prove that someone has a special enrollment period. I think we have been very on point with this, and we haven't been outside of what the bounds were at all. But I do know I think we'd be naive to think that agents across the country have not manufactured SEPs because there wasn't documentation required. I know that CMS is really trying to tighten this up, and so starting, I think it's next week on the 16th of May, when we submit applications for individual health insurance plans through the marketplace, if it's a loss of coverage, we have to provide the documentation and upload that, for the client to prove that the client has a special enrollment period. It's going to be a little bit of extra work on our part, but I also think that kind of should motivate us a little bit to look at ICHRAs, because ICHRAs can provide an awesome opportunity to actually create special enrollment periods any time of year for small companies that we're working with. We've actually had some traction. I can't say success yet, but some traction with several of you who have begun switching up your walk and talk scripts a little bit. Steve Cavajola has been running point on this, and I know coaching and training and using some AI to figure out like what's the right messaging here. When I think about the work that we do walking into Small Business America and introducing ourselves, historically, we have really led with health insurance, and you need help with your health insurance. And I think that was a very hot topic for many years and probably continues to be. But several of you have now had some success walking in with ICHRA as the lead, the lead product that you're talking about. I think many small business owners are not even aware of what ICHRA is and the options available. And candidly, there's ways to design these ICHRA programs where it costs the employer really not a whole lot of money, be able to give their employees opportunities to enroll, and employees that they're bringing on mid-year have that, that special enrollment period because an ICHRA is in place. So I'll just throw that out there, and I'll throw out a plug. Next Tuesday, we're going to host our agent development training, and the focus is going to be on this topic and how do we really engage with Small Business America at a high level to begin to find some of these opportunities. I think about many of you as new agents. If you could find one 10-person ICHRA a month, you'd be okay. I'm not saying that gets you to where you want to be and where you hope to get to, but you'd be okay if you could find one 10-person ICHRA a month. And so I had a meeting yesterday with Dan Garrison, our president, and talked through this, some ideas that I had and maybe some corporate collateral that we can push towards this. I had a meeting today with Paul Kaler. He's working on some things. He's one of our territory vice presidents. He's working on some things, some collateral and stuff that we can use to really not only advertise this, but then really understand how do we once we have a client or a prospective client that's interested, what does that process look like? So I've been very open with Mary Margaret over the years, kind of about where we're at with this. Her and I had a great conversation last Thursday as I was driving back from Columbus. I will say I'm beginning, and I probably should recognize this sooner, but beginning to recognize that Mary Margaret is really an industry leader when it comes to understanding ICHRA and how to leverage it. So I'll let her tell her story a little bit. And I think I'd love for you to start with that. Like, how did you get to where this subject matter expert, status that you're at as far as ICHRAs are concerned, and then we can kind of dive in. Full transparency, there are multiple ICHRA vendors out there. Many of you have worked with Base for many years, and Base may be a viable solution for some of our clients. I will say Base utilizes a reimbursement model where the employees have to pay for the health insurance up front and then get reimbursed, which sometimes works. I would say in situations where you're blowing up group insurance to move someone to an ICHRA, I think that reimbursement model is not quite as attractive as what Savii has in their portfolio. So we'll kind of talk through the differences here, but Mary Margaret, I'm going to turn things over to you for the rest of the hour here. And if we need a little more than that, I can stay on a little bit longer, and you guys can decide whether you're able to or not. But this will be our one-on-one session. We're going to do a 201 and maybe even a 301 session in the coming weeks. So thank you all for being here. Mary Margaret, the floor is yours.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Silas. So I like that subject matter expert. That's a really nice way to call me a complete nerd. So little bit of background on me. I'm excited to be here. Love the health markets team. Have worked extensively throughout the country with various members of your guys' team on both smaller groups as well as really large groups. In fact, one of the largest groups that we've worked on together is Connect for Health Colorado, where we worked extensively with Tasha Riggs and her team to bring, I think, a pretty large client historically for health market agents on board. They were, I think, over 250 lives. But more of the story is, I come out of the self-funded space. Prior to that, I come out of the technology space, worked at DoorDash, of all companies, for a really long time, stayed 1 year post the company going public. And I think everybody has an interesting story for how they got into employee benefits. I was actually approached by the owner of a third-party administrative company, had the opportunity to come in, and found out that it was really kind of a turnaround. But really during my tenure there, that's where I became very nerdy on self-funding in general. So developed a lot of level funded offerings, unbundled solution, all the fun stuff like reference-based pricing. But when I started taking a look at where I thought the future of the industry was going, I'm a big believer that consumer-driven healthcare is going to be a giant piece of that. I actually personally believe that fully insured in general, the kind of writing is on the wall as far as that employee benefit strategy is concerned. My view is that the future will be all, around really some sort of self-funding, which ICHRA ultimately falls into that. But, Savii in general, we've been around a little over 3 years. We built out originally our administrative platform with Jimmy John's. So we picked a very complex use case, franchise model, a lot of movement on those censuses, and, just working all over the place. That's kind of the nature of a franchise, working across multiple different geographic areas. But today, we're really going to be going through a bit of an ICHRA 101. This is kind of designed as a bit of a refresher and specifically walking through, some deep dives on how you actually prospect for an ICHRA client. One of the takeaways that I'm going to send out post-call to Silas is we came up with a needs analysis and a objection handling worksheet. I think that's kind of helpful, especially if you're doing drop-ins. You kind of have a script, you're going to make it your own, and then just some objections that we historically have seen, and ultimately, how to kind of respond back to those. This is informal, though. I'm going to share a screen, walk through a presentation, but don't hesitate to holler out questions. I'm also going to be asking, anybody who has experience if they have anything to add, but it's meant to be collaborative and informative. So with that in mind, I'm going to share screen and we'll get rolling. All right. Can everybody see my screen? We're good? Okay.
Yeah, it looks great.
So I always like to kind of start with Savii's why, and I think this should really resonate with the health markets team, because I think we have a lot of kind of overlap here. Moral of the story with consumer-driven healthcare and ICHRA in general is it's all about choice, and the fact that that choice is now being passed along to the individual as opposed to the employer making that choice on their behalf. So one of the big things that we see is really critical is that as an ICHRA administrator, we are setting these employees up for success, and by that, providing them with the tools and resources to make an educated decision. That is something that in general, we look at ICHRA as being on a learning curve, and that's where our partnership with health markets has been really incredible, is that we partner with health markets in a lot of markets where you guys are actually assisting these employees walking through that shopping experience. And today that's really, really important because healthcare consumers are really not educated enough historically to navigate a fully digital experience, because most don't know the difference between copay and coinsurance and an EPO and an HMO. So it fills them with a lot of confidence, and we know that they end up on the other end of that decision-making process, having made a good educated decision, especially when they're working with somebody like a health markets agent who can guide them through and really be kind of that translator, if you will, when we're talking about all the things that go into insurance. So ICHRA in general, some of this will probably be a little bit of repeat, but this is a type of HRA. In general, this came out in 2020 during the first Trump administration. Most people are probably familiar that prior to that, ICHRA kind of started as the QSERA. What's different in general about an ICHRA is this actually is now available to employers of any size. So this actually meets that employer mandate that is required of large employers who are federally mandated by the government to offer insurance and affordable insurance. But a good way, I think, to kind of explain ICHRA, where insurance loves its acronyms, this is another beautiful one, is really to talk about, most people are familiar with a 401k, and ICHRA is really the 401k of health insurance. So it's very similar to how pensions moved into the 401k model that we're used to today. But overarching, this is a tax-advantaged health benefit, and ultimately it allows employers to reimburse their employees for those individual health insurance premiums, which is pretty unique for an HRA. Any questions on this slide before we move on? Okay.
I would say you guys are welcome to unmute too. I muted everybody, but if you want to say something, feel free to unmute and talk.
Color it out. But let's kind of start with, what's the ICHRA difference, if you will. Kind of some of the core components that make ICHRA different than what most employers and employees are used to is really that one-size-fits-all aspect that most employees and employers are used to operating within today, where that's really called a defined benefit, where the employer is determining who is the carrier, what are those, say, 1 to 3 plans that employees have to choose from, and then, hey, employees, this is your choice selection. Hopefully one of these fits you. ICHRA is really the opposite of that. It's where the employer is actually offering a defined contribution. So they're offering a defined monetary amount, and then the employee gets to utilize that money dollar amount to go out and purchase an individual plan that's totally based around them. So this is really centered around personalization. So think of it as though I'm going out to find a plan that specifically fits my needs, wants, and budget as well. And then finally, really these are the same tax-free benefit that employers are used to. So they're not giving that up. That's the same kind of pullover, if you will, from what they're traditionally used to under a group health plan. But I think this is a good, succinct way to kind of hone in on the primary value props and easy kind of things to talk to prospects about when you're explaining, hey, what's an ICHRA and how is it potentially different than what the employer is historically used to offering? Questions or anything to add on this slide? Got it. So let's talk about why we see employers loving ICHRA. And these bullet points, I think, do a really good job. I'm not going to go deep dive into all of these. I'm actually going to speak to this from what Savii sees historically. I think the big one is the budget control. So as you guys know, in the end, benefits in general are about attracting and retaining talent, while at the same time ensuring that it's something that a company can actually forecast and budget for on a yearly basis. The reason why we are finding ICHRA really resonate with employers is because of the nature of that defined contribution model. it actually allows them to completely stabilize and have a predictable top 3 P&L line item, which is really huge for business owners and specifically businesses that maybe have a CFO in place whose core job responsibility is to manage and forecast those finances from a business perspective on a yearly basis. The other big one, and we've got it underlined here at the bottom, especially for more of those small and medium-sized businesses, is that an ICHRA doesn't require participation, any sort of minimum participation. That's absolutely enormous. And it kind of reminds me back to when we were first working with Jimmy John's. Hospitality in general can really struggle to meet minimum participation requirements because their workforces are made up of a segment that is salary and a segment that is hourly. And they oftentimes had where employees wouldn't opt into the employee benefit program. So the minimum requirement piece was something that was very frustrating and that they saw as a big value with this particular strategy. And then kind of last one I'd just say is the flexibility involved. I like to refer to ICHRA as a Swiss Army knife. It is really a very cool tool as it relates to extreme customization. Really, I think a good way to look at ICHRA is really what is the pain point that you're solving for as it relates to the employer. And, there's a lot of flexibility within an ICHRA to solve specifically for that, which is pretty unique compared to what we're used to with kind of the one size fits all, a take it or leave it model. Anything else kind of from people's experience that you would add into kind of why you're potentially seeing employers really be attracted to the ICHRA employee benefit strategy?
So I can chime in here and say one thing we're seeing with small employers is just the reality that setting up an ICHRA opens up creates a qualifying event that triggers a special enrollment period, not only for employees to enroll in coverage mid-year, but also just having that vehicle as they add employees to the group to be able to have those employees, have access to go out and shop and pick up a product mid-year as well. So, I mean, I know we've done some smaller ones where honestly the employer wasn't really contributing a whole lot, but they were just using the ICHRA as a vehicle to keep that enrollment period available for people as they came on board too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's make the shift to, why employees. I think it really, from my perspective, it all revolves around choice. I think in general, what we're seeing is healthcare really take a focus, especially as we walk towards, millennials and younger generations becoming kind of primary healthcare consumers. We're really seeing that they value choice. And, I think we're seeing a big shift in direct primary care and all of these pieces where it's very centered around the individual. And ICHRA really embodies that. So that's a big one, I would say, especially at Savii, that we see that employees in general kind of comment on is enjoying the fact that they can choose for themselves based on their personal situation. The other piece from an employee perspective that's really unique about an ICHRA is, in general, an ICHRA is actually unbundling insurance from the employer. So the employer moves into really this financial role of offering that defined monetary amount, where the policy owner in an ICHRA is now the individual. So what that means these are portable. So if an employee leaves or is terminated, they don't have to lose their insurance anymore. In fact, they can take it with them. What they do obviously lose is the monetary contribution by their employer. But this is very seismically different than what we're used to. COBRA does still apply. An extension and offer of COBRA does need to go out. We've actually never seen that an employee has made the decision to take COBRA because depending on the employee's situation, they've obviously experienced a qualifying life event if they leave. And in fact, they may at this time be eligible for premium tax credits potentially. And then the big one is, going back to the customization aspect, adding family members or additional coverage is needed. I think it just revolves around the fact that employees really like ICHRA due to the fact that it can be totally personalized to them. And that's where really I see the health markets team kind of being ahead of the game is you guys are used to guiding employees through that process. you have a very good understanding of the needs analysis that you need to walk an employee through, so they can end up on that decision-making process on the other end, picking a plan that's totally personalized to them and that stays within their personal budget. But let's talk for a second about kind of the problems ICHRA solves. In the end, when you're prospecting, that's what you're looking for is, what's the pain point and what is a potential solution that I can bring to the table for my current client or prospect. So the big one here is that we're all aware of is healthcare costs in general continue to climb. And especially for those small and medium-sized businesses, we're really on that upward hockey stick, and it's coming to the point where it's very unsustainable. So employers are really looking for what is the option here to kind of, in the world of an ICHRA, get out of the risk management business. And that's exactly what an ICHRA does. It allows the employer to transfer 100% of their risk into the individual market, which allows them to enter into a much more stable environment. The next one is that administrative burden perspective. So not only going through kind of the yearly cycle of renewing your group health plan, but also the process of shopping it if you do that, administering it, open enrollment, chasing down employees to get that done. And then HR oftentimes has to be the subject matter expert on this group health plan. So it puts a lot of pressure and responsibility on the employer. And one of the things I always say is most employers did not go into business ultimately to manage healthcare. They got into business because they manage a coffee shop or manage a car dealership or what have you. So the idea of being able to transfer that power of choice and the individual owning their own healthcare really resonates with employers. And then kind of the next ones that as we walk down, we already talked about the participation rate requirements, those go away. But another big one is that ACA compliance aspect. This ICHRA in general is a very easy way to check that box for employers so they don't need to worry about that. But I think this is just a subset, honestly. These are kind of the top items that we see that ICHRA is actively solving for. I'm sure there's a bunch more items that maybe we kind of consider more edge cases. But these are certainly top of mind for us when we're working with different consulting partners. Anything that anybody else, I guess, would add to the list here? All right. The next thing is kind of a comparison. So for those who have traditional group health plan experience, this is oftentimes what groups are used to. They're used to a fully insured plan, a level funded plan, if in fact they're offering benefits. So we get a lot of questions about how is ICHRA different than what I've been traditionally offering? And really, that's where this feature kind of column comes into play, whether it's a cost control all the way down to participation requirements. These are kind of the compare and contrast between the two. I think the big thing is, between a traditional group health plan and ICHRA, the biggest resounding thing that we hear is the predictability factor. There's a lot of unpredictability for small and medium-sized businesses, and it can be very volatile for them. So that the idea of being able to go into that very predictable and kind of more steady environment of the individual market is a huge win for that type of employer. And then honestly, a lot of this we've already kind of went through is the geographic flexibility, especially with larger groups that span different states. It's super difficult for them to find one carrier and one plan that's going to provide equal coverage for all their employees, specifically spread across different states. And then obviously on the participation requirement side, traditional group health plans require anywhere from 50 upward to 70% plus participation by the group in order to actually be underwritten and to be able to offer that plan. So a little snapshot there for you. But how it works, and I think, going back, it's all about simplicity. Really, the entire process kind of can be summed up in this visual where the employer is giving that fixed monetary defined contribution amount. Employee then is utilizing that either via self-shopping on the Savii platform or working with somebody like yourself at Health Markets to walk through a shopping experience and a needs analysis to actually purchase a plan with the defined contribution their employer gives to them. And then really Savii is ultimately there to help employees find that coverage. We help with all the legal plan documents and kind of the ongoing administration that's involved with running an efficient and compliant ICHRA. So it really dramatically simplifies it from what most employers are used to with a traditional group health plan. I personally really like this slide because one of the big things that I'm seeing employers struggle with is there's a bit of a mind shift that needs to happen when you, especially for employers that are used to the group health plan model versus the ICHRA. We obviously know that an ICHRA is a group health plan, but it's a group health plan that ladders down into individual policies and where the choice factor goes to the employee. So one of the big things that we try to stress with employer groups is you need to keep in mind that you are no longer responsible for picking a plan for your employees. Instead, actually, what you're picking here is a market, and you're determining which market am I and my employees better served by. That's really the big shift that's happening, and something that, depending on the employer group, they get to quickly or it takes them a second. A lot of HR teams are used to doing things a certain way. They're very paternalistic about their benefits. So really upfront when you're talking to a prospect, being sure that they understand that it's no longer them picking on behalf of their employees. It's them determining what market is a better fit for them and what they're trying to accomplish. Silas, anything you'd add to this? I know you have some experience kind of on the ICHRA side, but do you ever have kind of that conversation with employer groups where they're very used to picking and that can be a little bit of a hurdle?
I can't say I've necessarily run into that myself, where that's a hurdle. But I think a lot of the groups that we've worked with so far have been smaller groups where they're coming from nothing, right? It's not that they're transitioning away from group insurance yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think I've seen a lot of that, but maybe somebody else on the call has.
In general, this gives you a good insight when you run across those groups that maybe are coming off of a group health plan. You know, this is kind of the mindset or the mind shift is you're no longer deciding. Instead, you're contributing and transitioning that power of choice to your employees. So when we look through this kind of diagram, obviously there's a very strong case for the individual market versus group market, especially with smaller employer groups.
And I do think too, like sometimes employees get the feeling that, oh, you're getting rid of the group insurance. So there's still some sizzle in the individual market, you know, and the individual plans. And she kind of highlights it here. But I think one of the big ones is that the employees get to pick and choose what they want, how they want to build their plan. It's not one size fits all. It's also portable. So it's not tied to whether or not they work for a particular, you know, employer. So there are some real upsides. It's not just employer benefit, it's also employee benefit. And I think we need to know how to tell that story too, because we're going to be working directly with the employees. We don't want to go in and help a company transition from group, you know, to an ICHRA with individual policies and have everybody feel like they're being, you know, forced into lesser coverage. I think there's some real upsides and we need to be able to accentuate those.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Randy.
So I've introduced ICHRAs to a number of businesses, and two of them really kind of, I felt like I had made a good pitch to them, and then they came back, I think with the a sudden new proposal from their group agent. And I'm just wondering if you could kind of elaborate on that, because I couldn't really get a lot of feedback from them. But what's the, you know, something that is happening behind the scenes with these group agents that we should be aware of as we encounter, you know, businesses that are looking at switching from this?
Sure. So from our perspective, we've definitely seen where our ICHRA proposals are being leveraged to put pressure on the group carriers to bring the rates down. That's certainly happening. I think what I would push back with is I'm a really big believer that ICHRA is a matter of when, not if, because when you are in the group health plan market, you're deciding to participate in risk management actively. And the statistic, I believe, is out in 1 in 5 years, you're going to get a catastrophic claim that blows up your risk pool. And you're going to have to try to figure out what you're going to do with that premium increase because your loss ratio is upside down. So that's really where I would come back with, that makes sense. This is probably a temporary relief by the carrier. But in general, the carriers, especially when you're talking about smaller risk pools, they're not just going to sustain that negative loss ratio. There will come a time where they need to recoup that, and it will come in the form of increased premium. So, I think it's not that you're always going to win that group. They may take that year one relief, but it's a good thing to educate them on, because once you come back into their renewal cycle and they're seeing another, let's say 15% hike, you can almost kind of say, I told you so, and just remind them about, hey, do you still want to play and be in risk management? Because here's your opportunity to not have to do that anymore.
Well, I almost see this kind of what we see going on in the Medicare space, where you got the people that want the supplements and they bounce to different supplements because of the rate increases, but eventually they're going to have a health issue where their only option's a Medicare Advantage plan. I see this is what's going to happen with the group market. They're going to bounce around, but eventually they're just not going to be able to afford it. And we're there to pick up the pieces and help them with this.
I would say too, Randy, I think some of these group brokers, I mean, I shouldn't be stereotyping people, but my sense with many of them that I've worked with is they're lazy. And so they're not necessarily always actively shopping at renewal for all of their clients. They're just saying, oh, it was a 12% increase. That's pretty good. Keep it and roll. And so, I think maybe coming back with some pressure is forcing them to go reshop that and actually do some work on the case. I think especially in our markets here, there's really two kinds of group plans. There's the ACA compliant plans, which are, more community rated. And then there's level funded plans, which mean that the insurance company can look at the risk of the group and potentially give them a lower rate if it's a young, healthy group. And so what you could be seeing happening there is maybe they were on an ACA plan and the employer or the group broker got some pressure by you to force them to start looking at other things. And now they're coming back with a level funded possibility. But I would say, to Mary Margaret's point, like, even if they go to a level funded, I mean, it's a matter of time before they have a major claim that blows that thing up again, right? So I think it's just planting those seeds too along the way, so that when the implosion does happen, hopefully you're the guy to be there. And these implosions are real, guys. I mean, I shared with you, we had a small group come into our office last fall, 500% rate increase. I mean, it was going from $500 a month per employee to $2,500 a month per employee. And so those things, that's happening, and even if it's not 500%, even if it's 20 or 30%, which we see fairly regularly, companies can't sustain that long term.
Yeah, I always talk about that where, companies oftentimes are really thankful about a, 10+% increase, but really the way I look at that is it's compounding. You've gotten a 10% increase for the last 4 years. That's a 40% increase. So, and I know we have a tendency to always look at the right here, right now, but one thing that I've often found can be really impactful is if you can get a hold of that historical renewal data and plot that against the individual market, that's a very compelling visual, a night and day difference as it relates to stability of market.
Well, one thing I want to add also is some people are gotten doing this. We have some business owners telling us that their group broker said there are no other options. They're not even talking about ICHRA. So we've got to be prepared for that too. That again, with Silas's point, they're kind of lazy. They're going to tell people there's no options, all that kind of stuff. And so when we come in and we show an alternative, they're going to start questioning their group broker. Why didn't he tell me about this kind of stuff? So I think that's something that we need to leverage to our advantage too.
I have another question about, and maybe you'll get to this, but this whole issue of affordability comes into play. And, I think as a new agent, I've gotten really wrapped around the axle a lot about this. Do you have any documentation, or can we get some additional help in this whole affordability thing, because once we start shopping, I think it becomes very complex, and the other company that we've been utilizing has not been very helpful in helping me in that regard.
Do you mind if I've got a quick question back. When you're talking about affordability, is it in relation to larger employers where you have to insure, or it's a, hey, this is potentially unaffordable and I want to determine whether or not premium tax credits are a better route, therefore opt out?
Well,
Okay,
the second part.
sure. Makes sense.
Could it?
Yeah.
Could I jump in just real quick and correct me if I'm wrong, Mary Margaret, but I had a conversation about this with a couple of people that didn't understand this, and I'd like to say what I believe to be true and just verify with you, Mary Margaret. So really when this affordability clause comes into play is it's a big deal, whether it's a group that's over 50 or under 50. And the reason for that is because if a company has more than 50 employees, they are required to offer affordable coverage, or they have to pay a penalty for every, well, it's not for every, there's just a penalty that's assessed if they don't offer group insurance. And we can go into how to calculate that penalty. So I think as I'm talking to groups, it's a much different conversation if they're under 50 or over 50. If they're over 50, they're thinking through, okay, I've got to offer a ICHRA stipend, like the amount of money that I'm going to pay to my employees through this ICHRA has to meet certain affordability requirements to be deemed affordable, which means I'm still spending quite a bit of money and pushing a lot of money through the ICHRA to make sure that I'm giving them enough to make it affordable. When you deal with companies with less than 50 employees, there's no requirement that they offer affordable coverage. And so there's just a lot more flexibility in what they can do. Many of these employers that are under 50 employees and they don't have to offer affordable coverage, they could literally set one up and do $50 a month with the expectation that all of their employees are going to go to the individual market and chase the government subsidies. But they now have that ICHRA open to be able to create the special enrollment period for all their employees as they come on board and things like that. So I think at least the way I understand it, one of the big deciding factors is over 50 or under 50 when you're looking at the size of that group. Did I say anything incorrect there, Mary Margaret?
No, that's 100% correct. But I think, Randy, from your perspective, it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, as you're helping and guiding somebody through, just ensuring that you're maybe not encouraging them to pursue premium tax credits if in fact the ICHRA allocation is affordable. Because obviously that has ramifications if you're offered, because there's plenty of small employer shops that offer affordable ICHRAs. And it's just something to be cognizant of, because if the offer is deemed affordable, it disqualifies you from being able to qualify for premium tax credits. So to answer your, go ahead, Ernie.
Well, I think that the question has come in, and is these two employers each were paying 100% of the employee expenses, premiums, that kind of a thing. So in my mind, when I'm trying to help that employer, and they're trying to come up with an HRA versus how the subsidy would compare, how in the world do you compare apples to oranges to some degree when, how do you convey that to an employer when you're trying to differentiate, I guess, between how much impact that would have on the employer? I don't know if that makes sense, if what I'm asking, but you can't have an employee group go from 100% having their health coverage taken care of to putting them in an ACA plans. And how do you reconcile the difference in cost?
Yeah, so historically, when you're backing somebody into a contribution model, that's where you're going to want to pull that benchmark plan to kind of ground it to what they're used to. But kind of the beauty of the freedom of choice environment is the employee is actually determining their own employee responsibility. And that's kind of the leap that employers need to make, is although I want to give my employees, let's say, the buying power to be able to purchase at no cost, let's say the UHC gold plan, what have you. But really the thing you need to ensure that they understand is, although you benchmark that and that's your intention, employees have full ability to choose whatever they want to. So it may end up in a situation where they pick a plan or buy up above and beyond what the employer's defined amount is, and they actually have employer responsibility. But you may have people that buy down and they max out that stipend amount and have no responsibility out of pocket for premium. And that's, to be honest with you, it's just a shift in what we're used to. We've been doing employee benefits the same way for a really, really long time. It's kind of coaching a client through that. And oftentimes what can be helpful there is, pulling up something like Health Sherpa, for example, putting in that person's specific information and saying, hypothetically, you give me $500, let's go shopping. If I buy a gold plan, I'm hypothetically going to be out of pocket myself, let's say $100 a month, because I've decided to buy a gold plan. I think we're just kind of that's where we're at on the learning curve with employers today and employees. This is a big shift from what they're used to. They are used to, this is what I get, and this is, the offering that I have to choose from, where now this is the monies that are given to you. Here's all the selection available. And it's really going to be a shopping experience revolving around needs, wants, and budget.
And I think, Randy, an employer could, I mean, if they're paying 100% of the premium right now for their employees, they could go to an ICHRA and create an environment, if they're willing to push enough through that, through that ICHRA to each employee, to put them in a similar situation. I guess the other thing I would say in that situation, though, is that just my opinion would be, is that that employer may not be at a pain threshold that causes them to blow up the group yet, if they're still covering 100% of the premium, right?
Gotcha.
I feel like that's a very few employers do 100% of the premium. And I feel like there may be other levers that a small employer might pull first before they go to ICHRA, like having the employee pay 20% of the cost, or raising deductibles, or, there are other things they could do within inside that group plan. That's a very, very benefit rich stance from an employer perspective. But they're still traveling down the same path, right? So I just don't think that somebody in that situation may be as far along the path as the company that got the 500% rate increase.
Good question, though. Honestly, that in and of itself could probably be like a mini series, webinar itself. So, but now kind of the rest of the slides that I've pulled together here are really kind of revolving around who are good candidates for ICHRA. How do we ultimately get started with an ICHRA? So we'll start kind of on the ideal candidate side. And again, I'm sorry, some of this is probably a little bit of repeat, but I think the biggest one is just this top bullet point is employers that are on that unsustainable path. So, 10% increase, 15% increase, 10% increase, what have you, it's a compounding effect. The idea of being able to get out of the risk management business is huge for that type of employer, because again, this is a big cost driver for them, but they know they need to offer this in order to attract and retain talent, especially if there's a major employer in town who's an applicable large employer who probably does offer much richer benefits than what this smaller employer can potentially afford. This is a very compelling way for them to be ultimately competitive against, a large employer like that they were, are trying to shield themselves from, as far as not losing talent. And then I would just say, companies in general that are looking to replace that traditional group health plan. One in particular, especially when we talk about businesses who have never offered benefits before, startups have been really moving towards the ICHRA strategy in general. When you think of a startup, a lot of people are wearing a lot of hats. One of those is historically HR, and that person may or may not have experience in HR. Startups in general really like the simplicity of this, where here's the monetary amount. Now my employees have the ability to go out and purchase healthcare. I no longer have to be a subject matter expert on whatever it is historically under a traditional plan that I'd be offering to them. But kind of getting started, from a producer perspective is, and I'm honestly going to kind of jump ahead to this slide, is One, Savii from an ICHRA administration perspective is a little unique in the fact that we actually allow agents like yourself to retain agent of record. A lot of the other ICHRA administration platforms do not allow producers to retain AOR. One of the requirements with Savii, though, if you want to retain AOR, is getting Savii certified. Not a difficult process. Basically, what that certification is, we want you to understand how our technology works, and so you can navigate it efficiently. But kind of really, in my opinion, the big thing that as an agent, I would want to be really dangerous at, if you will, is being able to run prospects and current clients through kind of the ICHRA 101, the primary value propositions of this. Because Randy, to your point, you know, there's a lot of group brokers out there that are not presenting ICHRA at all. And in fact, we're hearing of a lot of kind of up and coming producers that are exclusively having these conversations in order to win BOR on accounts that they've been prospecting forever. But this is the first time that they've been able to come in and actually talk about something different. And it kind of forces the hand of the traditional broker who's maybe been back pocketing this particular strategy, because they just haven't wanted to kind of evolve into, you know, where employee benefits is going and something that's new. But in terms of, you know, outside of qualifying the prospect, the next big one from an agent perspective is once you have qualified your prospect, the next big step is Savii wants to help you actually pull together that contribution strategy. And that really all starts with having the client fill out our standardized intake census. So Savii will totally handle that on your behalf and create a client-facing proposal that walks, again, through ICHRA 101 and walks through a contribution model. One of the big things that's helpful, especially when you're prospecting a client, and let's say they're new to benefits for the first time, is to kind of talk about what kind of budget does that client want to allocate to benefits in general. That's something that's very unique about the ICHRA model, especially for small employers, is it actually allows them for the first time to start with their budget and work it back into a contribution model. Whereas in the traditional group side, they tell you what it's going to cost, and then you got to figure out how to budget for it. So it's a very much the inverse of what we've been traditionally navigating. And then really from there, you know, Savii is going to go ahead and create the contribution model and the client-facing proposal. We're generally turning those around in about 72 hours. That's going to tee yourself up to present to the client and close that opportunity. Savii's obviously happy to help kind of come in as co-pilot to position that and help close the deal. The biggest thing that I see that can kind of throw off an ICHRA is when you're going through that process of closing, it's very important to establish time frame. All ICHRAs in general are going to start on a first of the month. So we're always looking backwards. So as soon as you can kind of establish the effective date, that allows you then to establish open enrollment. And then kind of everything cascades from there in terms of onboarding and implementation. And then really kind of once the client is wanting to move forward, Savii really handles it from there. It all starts with our client intake form. We execute all the legal documents. And then from your position, really you're there to, you know, obviously be a guide for your client. But really from there, you're waiting for open enrollment to start. Because clients will actually start scheduling meetings with you, and you'll start walking them through the process as to how to spend that monetary amount and pick a plan. So we try to keep it very streamlined. We're not bogging you guys down with a bunch of administrative work. We're really allowing you to focus on kind of employee navigation to retain AOR, and then obviously continuing to hunt for new employer group business.
I'll just say too, I think that's really important because a lot of the agents who I think are looking to capitalize on this are newer agents who are actively seeking, you know, new business this time of year during the rest of your time frame. And so I do think it's you guys make it simple, you know, to go out and find the interested party and then bring them to the table and let you guys step in and take over.
Yeah, and what I'll say in general is of all the health markets agents that we work with, you know, everybody starts with having never done this before. So one thing that I encourage is we are very open. You know, it takes reps for anything to kind of become, hey, I'm used to this. And we encourage the questions. It's not uncommon for agents to reach out even after they've gone through Savii certified and have questions. Hey, you know, we're 5 days out from open enrollment. I think I know what to expect, but do you mind if we can spend 5 minutes and just kind of review that? We generally see that where the first 1 or 2 groups, there's a lot of questions just because you know, it's a system you haven't operated under before. But after that, you know, really think of this as a rinse and repeat. Every single client that you bring to the table, it will be a predictable onboarding process.
So can you elaborate a little bit more about the AOR? And it sounded like you almost shop for or on our behalf. I didn't understand. Go back to that.
Nope. So on your guys' end, you retain agent of record. So whether the employee decides to self-shop for themselves or wants to schedule time to meet with you and you help navigate them through, Savii really just facilitates that, if you will.
Okay.
Savii's not a brokerage. We actually can't help people shop, period. And we don't ultimately earn any of those carrier commissions today, just because we don't have the credentials to do so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I do think that's one of the differentiating factors with Savii is a lot of their would-be competitors, they want to bring a group into a platform where they're doing completely electronic enrollments through a self-shopping link, you know, no agent connection, and then they're the agent of record. The platform is the agent of record on all of those. So I do think that's a differentiating point that makes Savii better compatible, more compatible with like our model of selling, our face-to-face model.
What I'll say also is I think you guys have an enormous advantage over the traditional brokerage community because you are very well versed in the individual space. Where the traditional brokerage community is, you know, they know the group side. Yes, ICHRA's group, but the actual more valuable piece to be dangerous at, if you will, is that whole how do you navigate a person through a potential plan selection of 150 different plans. A traditional group broker is not going to know how to do that and really has no interest in learning that. And really, if you can speak to that consultatively, how you personally have done that, even outside of an ICHRA, that's going to fill the client and especially HR with a lot of confidence that they can successfully move in and go through the change management of switching it benefit strategies.
And to add to that, we are the best in the country when it comes to cross-selling into supplemental life insurance, other products. So I just feel like that's where a big opportunity exists for us. Many group brokers don't cross-sell like we sell, like we do. So I think even if they understand the product, the base health product, they're not protecting their client at as high of a level. They're not filling the gaps and holes, and they're not, you know, creating the revenue stream for themselves off of those cross-selling opportunities either.
Yep, agreed.
There were a couple of questions I just wanted to get to in the chat box. Zach asked about marketing materials. Mary Margaret, I don't know. I'd reached out to you, I think, earlier in the week or maybe late last week and just said, I don't know where you guys are at. Do you have marketing materials that we can use with small business owners and things?
We do. Actually, I'm going to send those out post-call. We were just pulling together that essentially script and that objection handling. So we're going to send that out post-call in a singular email with kind of the marketing material, ICHRA 101 and whatnot. Yep. Also, if there's anything in what we send out where you think that there's a gap, you know, I think Silas, our objective is really to work collaboratively to create this collateral and this training. But oftentimes we may not have insight into that because, you know, you guys are the front lines. You're talking with the clients, you're talking with the employees. And if collateral would be helpful, we can certainly create it.
That's awesome. So Bryson asked about compared to normal group plans, how different is agent comp, if any different at all? So group insurance is a different, you know, it's a different comp. You know, typically on group insurance, it's a per member per month type of, you know, comp in many situations. Some of them in certain states are percentages. So I think if you compared like ACA commissions to straight group insurance, they're probably on par with each other. I think where the opportunity exists though is in the cross sell, right? That's where like we can really get some additional revenue traction is that cross sell opportunity that's opened up when you move to the individual market like that. Duke asked, when gathering information on an ICHRA plan, you will need all employee income, correct?
So you will need all employee income if specifically they're an applicable large employer. Because remember, if affordability is a factor, that only applies to applicable large employers because they're federally mandated to offer affordable benefits. So when we talk about an applicable large employer, it just means they have 50 or more full-time equivalent employees. Anything underneath that, they're not federally mandated to offer benefits, let alone affordable benefits.
So when you're running these, this is my question, but when you're running these employee incomes, do you need just the employee income or do you need household income to calculate that?
Yeah, good question. So in the end, it's going to be highly unlikely that you're going to be able to get a true household income. So within an ICHRA, there's actually 3 different safe harbors that are available to employers to get close. So we'll utilize the safe harbor ultimately to back in to how you actually calculate affordability. You know, and affordability changes every year. It's 9.02% of household income this year. It will change next year. So we're constantly tweaking that on a yearly basis.
And just to be clear on that, guys, I think you guys know this, but just to make sure. So when the affordability is 9.02, what that means is that the cost of the insurance cannot be more than 9% of the employee's adjusted gross income. Did I say that right, Margaret? Yep. So now I would also say when you're dealing with small, and I'm asking you, Mary Margaret, when you deal with smaller groups and an employer is trying to dial in how much they want to contribute, is there value in having the household adjusted gross income to be able to calculate subsidies and things in that evaluation, or is that something that?
Yeah, I think so, because I think in the end, especially groups that are new to benefits, they have no idea what a benefits budget should even look like. And, you know, they're like, well, we're new to this, we're looking for some guidance. So historically, if you can get a hold of income information, what it allows you to do is establish a baseline that is universally known. And that's the baseline of affordability, which large employers have to abide by. So it kind of sets the stage where, like, hey, if you were a large employer and federally mandated, this is what the government considers affordable. Then from there, they can kind of determine, how do I want to hone in my budget at that point? Do I want to go above that, beyond that? What does that look like? But it allows them to kind of ground it somewhere.
Yep. So Sherry asked, does it make sense to move an employer other than 1/1 due to calendar year deductibles and out-of-pockets?
We see more of that than you would think, but to your point, it's very good to be cognizant of the fact that you're starting over. And in the end, any group that gets set up on a short plan year is going to experience that 1/1. Ultimately, every ICHRA aligns with a calendar year renewal. For example, last year we had groups that were moving on to an ICHRA 10/1, and obviously we're starting over with a 1/1 effective date of the new year. So I think it's just good to educate on it, and take a look at how many people are close or have met their deductible.
And I would say too, a lot of it would be determined if you're moving a group from a group plan, what is their renewal date? Because some of these renewal dates are mid-year, which also plays in. Now that doesn't change when the ACA re-enrollment and deductibles are going to, restart and everything. But if they're a 7/1, their deductibles and everything could be starting over the middle of the year. So you just got to take that into the calculation. So Cav asked, does Savii prefer to work with companies who want to contribute, or can we work with you if they just want to create the open enrollment, but don't want to contribute?
Yeah, we do both. So we do plenty of just really unaffordable ICHRAs to be able to initiate that special enrollment period. That's actually a segment within small employer groups that I think is really, really picking up, because historically, what we're talking about in that case is really sometimes a gross up is how groups have historically done that outside of an ICHRA. But by pulling an ICHRA, an unaffordable ICHRA into that, you now have the special enrollment period.
Well, where I see that the biggest is, I've got a couple people on ICHRAs and it's like, okay, we'll give $300 to our employee, but if they have a family, it's like, you got to pay the whole thing, where obviously that's going to create an unaffordable ICHRA where now they can chase subsidies.
Yep.
Correct?
Right.
So we literally can tell people, hey, you can set this up for $100 a month. just to get the special enrollment and then back out of it.
Yeah, we've done, $1 ICHRAs before because the intent, I mean, one thing to just be mindful of is like the optics of a $1 contribution. But, if you can effectively articulate to the workforce, like what the intention is here, and it's not that you're not contributing, it's literally we're opening up to all of this free money that's available. And I'm going to guide you through how to take advantage of that. Just the intention, the why behind it, that can be a big deal for employers and employees.
What about funding additional coverage for the healthcare premiums through employer bonuses instead of HRAs?
Yeah, so we see that as well, whether it's a bonus or like a gross up, depending on how they're, functioning. In the end, that all kind of goes back to what the employer can and cannot tell the employees they can do with those funds. Like if you're simply grossing somebody up, you cannot legally dictate how somebody uses their wage. When you're talking about bonuses, although we don't do those, I believe you can notate how that can be used. You should double check with an employment attorney though.
Yeah.
I'd also say, Randy, when employers are just grossing up wages, a couple of other things are happening. First of all, they're giving them a benefit that is in their mind or in the employer's mind designated for benefits. But 6 months or 12 months after they do that, when the employee's sitting at the bar with their buddy and they're asked if if their company offers them benefits, they're like, no, I don't get anything, right? So I think there's a risk there of it not being, front and center that they're actually doing anything over time. The other thing that's hard with that too, then, is to ever back it down. Like with an ICHRA, it's really designated for a certain purpose and a certain play. And if they ever want to go to group insurance or if they want to change something up or make adjustments, like it's much easier to do because they're just blowing up the ICHRA, not necessarily, reducing their entire staff's payroll, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's
so-
just a lot more control in the environment of an ICHRA versus wage. I mean, there's no control with wage because you legally cannot do that. Although you can position it a certain way, I'm the compliance police, I guess, just ensuring that you can't dictate, it's illegal, be not mindful of it, but you can have intention for it, I guess.
Sherry is one of my staff members. She comes from a deep HR background. So she said, interested in knowing from an employer perspective what the administration or legal documents might include.
Yeah, good question. So I'm going to send out, we have a very succinct kind of workbook that high level explains, what's a basic plan document, what's an adoption agreement, but high level, what all of these documents are, is there ERISA documents that ultimately dictate how the plan is run and how eligibility for the plan works. Some of these documents are 35 pages because in the land of insurance and ERISA, there's a lot of definitions, a lot of things to go through. But I think the document that I'll send out, it's a plan documents explained, will give you a good succinct understanding of what needs to be signed and what exactly is it and what are the implications for the employer.
Yep. Randy asked, do you have a list of business types that would most benefit from ICHRAs? And I don't,
Yes.
I would say any, but I don't know, maybe you have something else to that, Mary.
Yeah, some of the ones that really top of mind: manufacturing, nonprofit, hospitality, assisted living, startups are big ones that we see. But in the end, I think what's always interesting to me is once you get around to fourth quarter, throw who you thought your ideal customer profile was out the window, because all of a sudden, like we're quoting school districts right now. A cohort we never even thought would give this any sort of mind. Because in the end, I think it goes back to it's a matter of when, because just in general, when you're in the risk management business, you're going to get to the point potentially where it's not sustainable.
So do Gas, will either of the next webinars give us the ability to compare the costs with the group plan versus ICHRA? Estimates, of course. So I think that would be a difficult thing to do because both are very customizable, right? I will just tell you, group insurance here in Northern Indiana, Western Michigan, I tell employers, if you're going to offer, if you have not traditionally offered insurance and you want to offer insurance to your employees, you have to cover at least 50% of the employee-only portion of the premium. That's like the bare minimum they have to do by law, right? Many employers find that they have to pay more than that to get enough participation, enough people to come onto the plan, and they may feel like it's a good deal. But that's the bare minimum. And a high deductible, HSA approved plan, which is where a lot of employers start in their first, entry into the market. You're probably looking at a minimum of $500 to $600 a month per adult. And so as an employer, I'll just use a very ballpark range of, it's probably going to cost you a minimum of $250 to $300 a month per employee to even think about offering group insurance. That would be the bare minimum across the board on a lot of things, high deductible, just to give them some perspective. So if they have a 20-person group, and they're calculating $300, a month for each one of those 20 employees bare minimum, it just gives them kind of a starting point from a cost perspective. So, and then obviously the ICHRA can be built for whatever. I mean, I don't know if there's a good way to compare the two.
Yeah, I mean, you can compare them if you have the data. We can compare current group health plan costs to ICHRA. But it's very difficult to compare that apples to apples, because a group health plan, the best that we can do is find, as far as finding a comparable plan, is to look for a plan that's as similar as possible, but then you kind of put an asterisk next to that, noting that this is a freedom of choice environment. If there's one thing I can guarantee, it's that not all your employees are going to pick the same plan.
The main reason for that question was really because when we're doing these talks, at least I found out that, these folks want to see what that visual is. And a lot of these folks, they don't have their own HR department, so they don't know, exactly what they're asking for. So what they don't know is how well it compares to each other plan. So that was the only reason about that. And I guess once we start getting information from the employer and send it to you, I think that picture will become hopefully a little clearer. Is that correct?
Yeah, so in the standard intake form, if you can get the information from the employer, an understanding of, really what we ask for is, what's the SBC of the current plan that they have in place? And what's the breakdown? What are they contributing versus what is employee responsibility? We can then look for a plan that is as similar as possible to compare it to. Because what you're noting is, and HR is classic for this, with ICHRA, can my employees get as good or better coverage than what we're offering today? And then what you follow that up with is, here's the analysis. But again, everybody's going to pick potentially a different plan. Although this gives you that peace of mind, you can kind of toss it away, because once the employees walk through, it's all about them. It's no longer about what you previously chose.
No, I mean, that's just good to know, because we're always faced with the challenge of, well, I want to see this now before I even commit to doing anything. So as long as we know what some of the process is, that'll be just fine, I think.
Good question, Duke. I appreciate the clarity there too. So Cav asked, do you guys administer HSAs?
We do not today. So really, HSA compatible plan. Most of the time what we're seeing is really, if the groups come off of an HSA plan, they're just utilizing their previous HSA administrator.
Okay. And then the next question is, how does your model compare to a reimbursement model?
Yeah, so moral of the story is, under a traditional reimbursement model, the employees are utilizing their own payment method. They then, get that drafted off their card or their account or whatnot. They then have to go through what's called attestation. So they have to prove and submit proof to their employer that they utilize the ICHRA funds as intended. Then the employer has to then reimburse them for that amount. So a pre-funded model, what that does is it allows the employer to totally fund 100% of the amount of that premium. We drive that down into a payment method, which is called a for benefit of account. That initiates for you as the producer here, a payment type to solidify that binder and set it as recurring payment. So this thing looks and feels and operates like a traditional group health plan. So for example, let's say I'm given $500, but I buy a $1,000 plan. That's a $500, that's my responsibility. How the employer would recoup that then is by way of payroll deduction, which is the traditional way that a group health plan operates.
Are those pre-taxed?
Yep. So any sort of employee responsibility. Savii is always pairing their ICHRA with a cafeteria plan, so it's tax advantaged all the way through.
Nice.
Any
What
other?
other questions do we have, folks? I know we're
How
15 minutes
soon,
over here. And
how
some people
soon
like to
can I
know.
send, an employee census over to you?
Today.
Savvy
I
certified.
gotta just send you out the.
Do I
gotta
have to be
send you out
Savvy,
our-
do I have to be Savvy certified?
You don't have to be Savii certified to send it over, certainly, but like Savii certified will probably take you 45 minutes. So I'll go ahead and send that along just with the email. But in order to retain AOR, you're gonna have to find 45 minutes to walk through, just because we want you to know what to expect and how the technology functions.
I'm good with that.
What other questions do you folks have? Mary Margaret, I think this has been very good. I think we did this a year ago, but we have, I feel like, so much more of a base to work off of now than we did last year. And that's just part of, like you said, the transactions, the repetitions, immersing ourselves in the business, you know? So I do think there's a huge opportunity here. Do you want to give them a little teaser for what 201 might look like?
Yeah, I mean, so 201, I would say, is a lot of, getting down. What I'd actually really like to discuss is the various contribution models that are common. Because when you move from a defined benefit to defined contribution model, I think the secret to becoming really dangerous at these is, can you be highly consultative in helping your employer back into that contribution model? And it's not difficult. It's, you're looking at a census and they will really kind of jump out at you as to what the potential contribution model is going to look like. And historically, we're going to age band the contributions to give people equal buying power, because as we know, these are age-rated premiums, unlike a group health plan where you're talking about composite rates.
Yep. I think that'd be a great discussion to have. I would also tell you guys too, as you kind of embark on this journey and you start talking to employers, there are some things to consider, because sometimes group insurance does make the most sense. There are situations, when you have, an owner and family or key employees that is really important to them to be able to have broad access PPO type options. Most of the individual market plans are more limited network plans. And so that's, in my opinion, probably the biggest difference as far as the quality of the product is the network, because PPO plans are still available widely on the group market, where they're not so widely available in the individual market. So that would be the one thing. I mean, if you get an owner and his wife's seeking treatment at Mayo Clinic and, this is super important, ICHRA might not be the right play in that scenario.
Well, it's funny because we're working with Kelly out of Minnesota. I can't remember Kelly's last name right now, but we're onboarding a giant private school right now that was their thing. Obviously, Mayo Clinic's out of Minneapolis, and Kelly's been very helpful in helping us identify networks where Mayo Clinic is part of that network, because that was really like the deal breaker. If that wasn't available, then ICHRA wasn't going to be a fit, because they have a couple people in their employee population that have complex healthcare conditions, and that is going to really matter if all of a sudden they can't go to Mayo.
Yeah, and I think you could probably pull that off in the state of Minnesota, where Mayo resides. I think if you live in Indiana or Michigan, I'm not, well, we have one product in Indiana. It's an off exchange PPO plan with AM Better that could get you out of network coverage at Mayo. But other than that, there's not a lot of options to get to Mayo in the individual market. So those are just some things to kind of consider as you're, having that front end conversation to understand what it is they're really looking for.
Yeah.
Other questions before we wrap up today, folks? Cool. Mary Margaret, you're awesome. I appreciate your time today. I'm sure this will generate some questions and some quotes and some newly Savii certified agents for you to work with. So as soon as you send that over to me, I'll get that out to the team so that people can kind of follow up. And we'll get something scheduled the next couple of weeks for kind of the 201 version of things, if that's okay.
Perfect.
And did I see that once we get certified, we actually do get like a ICHRA 101 presentation that we can use with the customers.
Yep, exactly. You'll get that actually in advance as well, but yeah. Honestly, any collateral, like again, going back to like you guys are actively speaking with prospective groups much more often than we are at Savii, obviously. So us getting the understanding of what would be helpful is super valuable.
Well, I have a few other things, but we'll bring them up in 201. So
Okay.
thanks for being here, everybody. Appreciate your time today. Hopefully you learned something. Have a great rest of the week. Go see if you can find an ICHRA deal. Take care, everybody. See
Thanks
ya.
all. Bye.